Okay, good afternoon. I'm waving at you. I'm Stephen Jones. Welcome to this webinar from Bangor University, the Albert Gubay Business School, the executive education branch of the Albert Gubay Business School. And today we're very fortunate to be meeting a compliance specialist, Alexandra Sciberras. And the idea, if you've not been to one of these webinars before, in it will be current students, previous students who've graduated, other potential students, and also professionals from the industry just interested to know what's going on. In a moment, I'll set the scene very briefly before Alexandra and I get into a discussion. And the way for you to engage at the end, we'll save questions until the end, but you can post them in the chat area. You can post them in the chat, you can type them, and at the end, when we do get to Q&A, I'll present those questions to Alexandra. And if you have additional questions, you can unmute your microphone. We ask you to keep your microphones mute so that there's no distortion and cross feed and things. And we'll have a little bit at the end about Alexandra's own experience of being a student. So, next slide, please, Sinead. Here indeed is Alexandra, and she's showing her face on the screen live. In my screen, she's on the top left. She's smiling, so she's the smiling one. I don't normally smile. She's waving. Yeah, I don't normally smile. Yes, I do. So she looks after Sparkasse Bank in Malta, their financial crime oversight framework, as it says there. She's more than 20 years experience in the banking sector, and she graduated from our chartered banker. No, sorry, correction, not from the chartered banker. She graduated from our financial crime and compliance MBA last year. So she's got very current, recent experience about what it was like to be a student. And I'll ask her to say a few words about that at the end. And then we'll have the Q&A. So your Q&A could be about aspects of the talk, about financial crime compliance, but it could also be about Alexandra's own experience. Well, let's get started. I have a few slides to whistle through. Next slide, please. So I wanted to briefly tell you what we're going to be talking about in our conversation, Alexandra and I. The principles of financial services, anti-money laundering and countering terrorist financing. I'll give a few slides which I'll briefly introduce. You can get back to them afterwards and have a look at them. They're slides from our teaching material, so that gives you a sense of the kind of information you'll be getting. Then I'll say a very little bit about Malta's situation, including a very short period, when they were on the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force, and they got off that very quickly. I'll say a little bit about the recent establishment of the EU's Anti-Money Laundering Authority, which is not a competitor to the Financial Action Task Force, and we'll say a bit more about that. And the AMLA, the Anti-Money Laundering Authority for the EU, has many countries, of course, to look after, and it's choosing one bank from each country for intensive scrutiny. As to whether that's the best approach or not, and one bank fits all and gives an insight, well, they'll find out over time. Then we'll talk briefly about the impact of technology on data quality and the quantity of data, and the need for a common language across all stakeholders. So the next slide, please, Sinead. Here's Malta, in case you didn't know. It's an island in southern Europe, located in the Mediterranean Sea between Sicily and North Africa. The interesting thing about it is that it has a very small population, and yet financial services make up a significant proportion of Malta's GDP. It employs 19,000 people and makes up 12% of Malta's GDP. The interesting thing also is that over the last decade, Malta's managed to achieve a 7% average annual growth rate, one of the highest in Europe, and indeed one of the highest in the world. Just by way of third-party endorsement as to why talk about Malta, the International Monetary Fund earlier this year said, well, Malta has a robust economic performance despite global uncertainties. We all know what those global uncertainties have been and continue to be. And the IMF awards appropriate praise by saying robust economic performance, 7% annual average growth over the last decade, based on sound macroeconomic management, of which part of it is to have an approach across the financial services sector in Malta that makes sure that the country is not involved and becomes a centre for financial crime. Next slide. So just a little bit about the global financial ecosystem. We all operate in that global financial ecosystem, no matter what, whether we're just individual consumers who use banking services and don't work in the financial services sector, but whether we're in insurance, banking, mass market banking, electronic banking, private and wealth management banking, all sorts of banking. This quote from a publication the end of last year by the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, talks about the growth of the global financial ecosystem and the democratization of the financial system, which has allowed globalization of trade and related financial flows. Of course, we may say some of that is under threat in the way that some countries, not least of which the USA, has changed the dynamics. We're not here to talk about that today, but the part in the first paragraph, it says the development of internationally agreed standards via the Financial Action Task Force to make sure that all these participating countries, most countries do sign up to FATF's recommendations, boost the integrity of the financial services ecosystem. There are some that go out of their way to, we may call them rogue actors, but the vast majority sign up to it. And this was establishing the global nature of financial services ecosystem. So what happens in one country very quickly spreads around the world. We know that from the financial crisis, 2008, and the need for some form of regulatory body. Next slide, please. Well, the way that the Financial Action Task Force operates, I'm not going to go through it in great detail. On the left-hand side, you can see the world, and you'll see that the world has been divided up by the Financial Action Task Force into a whole set of regional bodies. So there are regional bodies that undertake, using the Financial Action Task Force's processes, they undertake reviews of other countries in their own particular region, and they come out with some outcomes. We're not going to talk in detail about the outcomes. You can see the reference there should you wish to go and look at them in detail. Of course, you could come and join our Financial Crime and Compliance MBA. Next slide, please. As well as outcomes, there are recommendations. And again, these are in small print because we're not going to look at them in detail. But these are failure to comply with some of these, or maybe not comply isn't the right word, but to failure to have standards high enough to pass the benchmark, or what leads to countries being on the grey list. And some countries get off the grey list very quickly, as indeed did Malta. Others stay on for a long time, and there's a blacklist where countries stay on for a long time, mainly because they have no interest or intention of being part of the legitimate financial ecosystem globally. Next slide, please. At the heart of what we're going to be talking about with Alexandra is this idea of information. Will different information be required by the European Anti-Money Laundering Authority to the Financial Action Task Force? What about people? People, it's often rogue individuals who bypass systems, even whether they be in government, whether they be in law enforcement, whether they be in financial services companies. And it's about having systems of which technology might be part and an appropriate culture. Notice the quote in the bottom left-hand corner that says, recognition tools in software are very useful for looking at transactions. There are literally billions of transactions going on, but at the bottom it says such tools cannot fully replace human judgment. So there's still a role for human judgment. The next slide tells us about Malta and the Financial Action Task Force. In 2022, sorry, the previous slide. In 2022, there's the reference to it. The Financial Action Task Force welcomed Malta's significant progress in improving its anti-money laundering, its countering of financing terrorist regimes, and they've strengthened their regime and they come off the list. The areas in which the review had previously found need for improvement was to do with who owns companies, and therefore this idea of beneficial ownership. Who actually is the beneficial owner, which may not be the name of the person on the door plate or on the registered forms, such that then makes it difficult to work out necessarily who the stakeholders are. Malta was, of course, very pleased to see that it was no longer subject to the Financial Action Task Force increased monitoring, but the recommendation was Malta should continue to work with Moneyval. Moneyval is the regional body which Malta falls under to continuously improve its systems. Now, that's all about FATF. The next slide shows us about other approaches, and this one is the approach of the European Union. Individual countries, the countries you're in individually, will have their own systems. Many of them are based on what was previously really the only game in town, the Financial Action Task Force. The heading to this, although it's not showing for some reason, is other approaches to identifying high-risk countries. Aha, it miraculously appears. So the idea is that the EU methodology, the reason I share this with you is because you can see in the diagram that the diagram, even though it's the EU methodology, also says, has the Financial Action Task Force already looked at this country? Do we find that their findings about this particular jurisdiction, this country, are valid? So there is a close link between the two of them. And on the right-hand side, you see the process in which the Anti-Money Laundering Agency, Authority of the European Union, has been going through it. They've started consulting, then they've got to work out these obliged entities who are going to be directly supervised, one from Malta. So it's not until January 2028 that they get into that position of directly supervising. Of course, what are they supervising? What are they trying to catch? Well, we're coming to the end of the slides, and then we'll get on to the conversation with Alexandra. What we call predicate offences on the next slide. Offences, what are the offences that criminals are undertaking, that countries need to have control or have systems that gather information? It's about trafficking in human beings. It's about organised criminal gangs, terrorism, sexual exploitation. You can see them all there. The interesting thing is that there are very, very minor differences between what the Financial Action Task Force for many years has considered to be offences. Predicate means what's the initial offence that causes thereafter the process of absorption, assimilation, disguising into the legitimate financial services system. There are very minor differences between what FATF does and what the European Union system will do. So broadly, they're in agreement there. And some people will say, well, why do we have to have two systems? Nevertheless, we have two systems. And the possible impact of the European Union Anti-Money Laundering Authority is shown on this final slide before we start the discussion. The rationale for the, where are we? We've jumped. Okay, so the rationale for the European Anti-Money Laundering Authority is it's difficult across all the member nations to get the same standard of practices. So the situation was that some EU countries were reluctant, unable to implement the anti-money laundering directives. There were delays in setting up some of the registers about beneficial ownership, for example, in Cyprus and Hungary, inconsistency. And the idea was that this AMLD that AMLA is going to implement will introduce standardization. And of course, this is an example of nothing standing still. So the regulations, and some countries in the EU did have appropriate regulations, but then things change, like crypto business models come in, how to control for those, and therefore it's about introducing what we may say is a level playing field across all EU nations. Some will have more work to do to get to the standards. When Ernst & Young EY interviewed some industry professionals last year, they found that in general, industry professionals were in the financial services sector were quite keen on a standardized regulation, because then they know what they have to do in all those countries. Not as I go to one country, it's different to country B to country C. But they worried about the adjustments they'd need to make in their own organizations for compliance. Now, that's a quick whistle-stop tour of how we got to the need to understand compliance. And now it's hello to Alexandra. And in our discussion, I've set the scene by talking about Malta and things. We're going to talk about how far Alexandra thinks Malta as a whole, not necessarily her own bank, that'll be confidential, has progressed in getting ready for the European Union system. We'll talk about the impact of technology and a common language across stakeholders. Alexandra, thanks again for joining us and sharing your insights with other people who may be thinking of joining our programs, may indeed have been some of your colleagues on when you studied. What was the perception within Malta when Malta was on the Financial Action Task Force grey list?
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you for having me this afternoon. So Malta's perception when we were on the grey list, I don't think it was a surprise for us, actually. I'm talking from my perspective here, but from what I see and from what I discuss with my colleagues in the industry, we weren't surprised. We knew, because we had a money value evaluation, we knew the outcome, and we had a feeling that, yes, we may be grey listed. So the perception was, okay, we are grey listed. We need to get off that grey list and stay off. So Malta did not wait, actually, to get grey listed. People within the industry were already working, and even other authorities and bodies were working towards Malta being in compliance with what they should have been with. So when we were actually grey listed, we were already halfway working through what we needed to get done in order to get off that grey list. So it was a time where, yes, we were all quite upset about it, because Malta is a small jurisdiction. We are in the industry, in the banking industry, to do business, and being on the grey list didn't really help, because even with our correspondent bank relationships, we actually suffered there. And obviously there was much more scrutiny on banks individually and on the jurisdiction itself. So we were frowned upon, unfortunately. Me being Maltese, that hurt a lot, because as soon as now, if in the past nobody knew about Malta, nowadays wherever I go, it's like, oh, you're from Malta, okay, everyone knows Malta. So is it good, is it bad? They know us, but unfortunately the grey listing did come with its perks as well, because we're known all over the world now.
That's right. And I think thanks for that very honest insight that it wasn't a surprise. But also, I mean, I take from that for anybody listening in any country, the idea is to be proactive. There will be some countries around the world who are intentionally operating in the grey area or even the black list area, because they can make more money out of it that way, attracting criminals to their jurisdiction, than they can being legitimate. They're very few and far between. We won't mention any names, but you can imagine who they are. So a proactive approach to get off the list and things. And although you say that it put Malta on the map, so to speak, also it put Malta on the map for getting off the list very quickly, as we saw in that slide a few minutes ago. So it's proactive. And I suppose one of the questions I asked you, what was the perception in the industry, but of course there are other stakeholders involved. You talk about your correspondent banking relationships. There are companies in other industries in Malta who may find it difficult to transact internationally and things. What about the government? Did the government have to create new legislation, any changes to existing legislation to assist to get off the grey list?
No changes in legislation, really. I mean, the legislation has always been in place. We have an FIAU, which is quite robust, the Malta Financial Services Authority, the same as regulators. There's the Malta Gaming Authority as well, a very strong authority there as well. The government had set up a national coordinating committee, which undertakes an exercise it's a thorough exercise which goes on for a couple of years to come up with Malta's national risk assessment. So over there, the committee itself became more robust, undertaking the assessments on Malta as they should be, coming up with national risk assessments. So over there, from that aspect, the National Coordinating Committee and Malta's National Risk Assessment, that's where the government actually did come in. But when it came to legislation, the legislation was there. We have FIU implementing procedures, which provides us with a lot of guidance, people in the industry, not only in banking, also in other industries, in the corporate service provider industry, in financial services, in the gaming industry. There's a lot of guidance which helps us interpret the law and actually put our obligations into play, into practice. So we already had all the mechanisms in place. But I think what actually the grey listing of Malta, what happened is Malta grew the financial services sector in quite a short time, in quite a short period of time. And I think we could not actually keep up with the growth that there was. So there was a lot of demand. And eventually, obviously, then came the grey list. And then you know that, okay, things might have gone a bit sideways. But all in all, I think people within the industry, especially in banking, because I'm in banking, we've always tried to be the gatekeepers of Malta itself, which sometimes, being a bit too rigorous, too rigid, may have an opposite effect actually, rather than we probably focused more on onboarding our customers rather than looking at the transactions thereafter. We've learned from that, so it's more about your transaction monitoring, your ongoing monitoring, because you can easily onboard a customer. It is what they do after with the bank accounts, how they use them, how they infiltrate the financial system. So whilst all the rules and all the regulations were there and the guidance, I think we were probably not implementing them as rigorously as we should have. But we've learned from that. I think that with everything that happens, especially like a grey list, everyone learns from it. And to stay off the grey list, it's a joint effort. Every institution together, everyone who's in the financial services sector, all subject persons who have obligations towards anti-money laundering and the financing of terrorism. So it's a joint effort. So all in all, together with the government and everyone else, we all have to do our own part in order for Malta to stay out of the grey list. You're muted, Stephen.
I just realised. So in some respects, that leads us, we're going to jump, just to show that this is not pre-recorded, we are live. We're going to jump to the fourth question in a moment. But just to summarise, I think you've very clearly established there it's a range of stakeholders that need to pick up the ball, run with it, but also cooperate. And when you talked about Malta's financial services growing very quickly, One of the challenges in other jurisdictions, it may have been in Malta, is we take on board people, not only onboarding customers, but we take on board staff, and the challenge is training them all up to the same thing very, very quickly. So at the same time as know your customer, which is an ongoing, not just the initial onboarding, as Alexandra said, it's about monitoring them going forward, because that's what the criminals do. They present a clean face to get into the account on the presumption that in some countries they won't be monitored thereafter very much. Wow, what is that suspicious transaction going on there? So growth is good, but growth presents many challenges as well. We'll jump to the fourth question and then come back if we can, Alexandra. So, for example, across all these stakeholders, you talk about the FIU, the Malta Gaming, etc., the National Coordination Committee, I think it was called, Commission, as well as individual banks. Do you think beforehand there was a common language that everyone could understand?
There was a common language, but it was probably applied differently. Obviously, with the financial services growing, I think that, business is good and everyone wanted to, increase their business, and probably they weren't being applied the same. So whilst there was a common language, it wasn't applied the same across. Me coming from the banking sector, for us, it was like, okay, we are the gatekeepers. So we would probably apply more scrutiny than other financial services would have. But obviously, I'm speaking for myself, from my personal experience and from a banking perspective. That's how we felt it. Mm-hmm. So it was a common language, but being applied differently. The thing that in order for us to apply, have this common language, apply the same standards, in the meantime, there's been a lot of industry with the private sector discussions, private-public partnerships. We are constantly engaging with the regulator, with the FIU, with the MFSA. So at FIU level, there are what we call AML-CFT clinics, which we attend, and we can bring up like case studies, sanitized case studies of what we're dealing with, so they can provide us with their understanding or how we should apply it. And at the clinics, there are people from other banks, from other financial services sectors. So we all, so to speak, hear it from the horse's mouth, and we can apply it uniformly, all the same. So that way it helps us all in the sector. It helps Malta as well. It's the same with like the National Coordinating Committee I mentioned earlier. When they come to carry out Malta's national risk assessment, we actually, they make us, we have meetings, so we do meet up with them, and they do share the outcomes, their results. They ask for our information as well. So that's really good. So we can all get an understanding of what's going on and how people are seeing things from different angles, from different aspects, so we can all understand each other better. So a common language and a common understanding.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago about professional services firms, and I take that to be accountants and lawyers and things who are on the fringe, and some of these professions have a duty of, or an obligation for secrecy, particularly the legal profession. They're not allowed to divulge the activities of their clients, etc. So the complexity is not only about new forms of potential money laundering, cryptocurrencies, etc., but also about ever-increasing range of stakeholders who come in who haven't previously been involved in things like that. You talked about just a few minutes ago about the culture, and it seems to me that from what you've said about Malta, Malta has this willingness and tolerance of sharing, I think you called them sanitized cases, so that people from different aspects of creating a safe financial ecosystem in Malta, but in the global ecosystem, can get, as you said, from the horse's mouth, an insight as to how the regulator might look at it. But of course, there are some cultures in other parts of the world that don't have that freedom of sharing and their willingness to learn from others. They may have a very top-down perspective, etc. And in your engagement with other stakeholders in other countries, perhaps correspondent banking, do you find it, because now increasingly regulators say it's not just about you having all your systems in place, it's about what does your correspondent banking have? And if they're weak, and you engage in many transactions and relationships through them, then of course you become weak. Any thoughts on operating in other countries for banking relationships and business when perhaps they don't have the same openness and willingness that you've talked about in Malta?
It depends. It depends, first of all, if I'm talking from the bank where I work, depends on the risk appetite as well. So
Yes.
if you are going to work with an EU institution, an EU regulated institution, we should be following the same obligations. So it is a bit easier there. But in reality, the obligations do not really differ that much. So if you do have an appetite for correspondent banking as your customers, or else you are seeking correspondent banking relationships to facilitate your transactions, so the scrutiny could be, hello?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, my screen has just gone there.
No, it's
So
fine. We can hear you.
the scrutiny could be both ways, so to speak. Let me just log in again. Apologies for this.
It's okay. We can still hear you.
Okay. So when we are, for example, being onboarded by a correspondent bank, what they do with us is they would require an interview with myself, being the MLRO. So they would actually ask me, well, actually grill me about your systems, how you fulfill your obligations, what controls do you have in place, what policies do you have in place. You fill in questionnaires, you even have on-site visits. So it's the same. If you are onboarding correspondent banks as your customers, you would do the same thing. At the end of the day, even if they're not in the EU, so abiding by the same obligations, you have to find that common ground whereby you are satisfied with the risk that you are taking them on as your customers. And you need to also be satisfied with the controls that they have in place. So carrying out on-site visits, maybe having annual questionnaires, annual interviews with the MLROs, and probably, I don't know, every couple of years, doing a site inspection, seeing actually what they do have in place. Because at the end of the day, I think if you are dealing with a serious financial institution, a serious correspondent bank, they would have the right controls in place. There is an element of placing reliance on them, that they are undertaking their due diligence and knowing their customer, because it makes it easier for you when you are monitoring your transactions, the transactions from your end, and you have queries, you would go directly to the bank, because they should be knowing their customer as well, and you would be able to understand any transactions that may seem unusual.
Yes, and I remember reading when the European Union Anti-Money Laundering Authority was being set up, they said, now this doesn't just apply to members of the EU, it applies to a financial services provider from any country who wants to deal. So the financial services provider wants to deal with an entity in the EU, then yeah, they have to comply with those regulations. You talk about filling in questionnaires, site visits, etc., interviews. What about the role of technology? The role of technology. So we're kind of going in reverse order. We're back on question 3,
Right.
the impact of technology on data quality. Now, we say that there's such a huge volume of data. I refer to it in one of my setting the context slides. There's so much data that humans cannot sift it all and sort it out. The technology has a role to play, but may create false positives. I suppose it could be argued better to have false positives than than let too many people through. What do you think about the impact of technology on quality and quantity of data and its usefulness?
I think without technology, we can't actually do much unless you're a very, very small institution with very few payments. Technology plays a large part of our day-to-day. The impact of it is you can't do without technology. The regulator actually expects you to have technology in place to detect unusual or suspicious activity. Nowadays with AI as well, so most banks are adopting AI as well. AI will not, so the impact of technology is there to help us reduce the false positives, but yet have alerts, meaningful alerts. So AI can easily help and support that, whilst cannot replace the human element of transaction and ongoing monitoring. You can have a rule-based system which you would embed the rules in the system, so to have alerts as well. So technology is very important. It's actually what the regulator expects here in Malta, that you do have technology. And the data quality has to be good data quality, or else even if you are using AI, it won't be meaningful if the quality of your data is not up to scratch, is not up to date. And data, your customer data, so your identification data on your customer doesn't change, but the data in relation to transactional data, so the countries your customer is receiving payments from or sending payments to, the economic activity of your customer may not change either, but there would be elements in relation to your customer. For example, your customer's turnover may change, so the data there is always changing. So the quantity of the data, so the quality has to be good. The quantity, it increases. So, and it does fluctuate as well. So it increases, it changes, it fluctuates, because you could have less jurisdictions, you could have more. And data is really important, because nowadays all of your reporting it relates to data, and the more data you have, it is easier for you to fill out your reporting, to fulfill other reports. You might not have the exact data, but you may extract data and come up with what you're looking for. And even in order for your technology, for your systems, for your transaction monitoring, you need to keep some form of statistics to see how many alerts you had. Are they meaningful? Do I need to change rules? Do I need to increase people for in the monitoring teams to monitor transactions? So technology is very much a part of our day-to-day. So the impact of technology is large. The data is massive, and the quality has to be good of your data in order for you to have effective transaction and ongoing monitoring.
Yes, of course, as you said, it's captured in the old phrase "garbage in, garbage out." So
Exactly.
You need good quality of it, and yeah, artificial intelligence cannot make good sense of very poor quality data, etc. But the volume is ever increasing. You also echoed what the Financial Action Task Force said a year or two ago, that said, yeah, software is great, but there still needs to be human elements. So anybody listening who's either in the industry or thinking of joining the compliance role, there'll always be a need in some parts. I remember recently hearing a discussion, will my job be replaced by artificial intelligence? And the response in that particular conference was, it won't necessarily immediately be replaced by artificial intelligence itself, but you may be replaced by a human who has an understanding of how to use artificial intelligence. So there we are for everybody. What about our final question? You don't have to tell us whether you are the one Maltese bank who's been selected for intensive scrutiny, unless you wish to. I don't know if you are. This process, they have many member countries, and for intensive scrutiny, unless something goes wrong, of course, and that it's drawn to their attention, I think they're going to look at, in Malta's case, one single bank, and the question to what extent one bank can be representative of the population. What do you know anything about the criteria of how they're choosing that bank? It's a big bank, it's a small bank, it's one that's had problems, or what?
The AMLA actually did. They did issue an RTS, regulatory technical standard, in relation to the criteria.
Yeah.
Which in reality, Malta, I don't think there is a bank in Malta that actually fulfilled the criteria that there was. But recently, so to answer your first question, Stephen, to date, I do not think that we know which bank has been selected, or financial institution, because it may not be a credit institution. But what AMLA did is, as a bank, we participated in a data gathering exercise, and it was driven by AMLA, so the Anti-Money Laundering Authority of the EU. So a few banks in Malta, if not all, I'm not aware if all of them was, but we took part in a data gathering exercise whereby AMLA asked for, they had templates, we filled in these templates, they asked for a lot of data. And we submitted those maybe around 2 weeks ago. I believe that even other jurisdictions filled in the same templates as we did. I'm aware that in Ireland they did, because we have a branch in Ireland, and our branch did fill in the forms as well for the data for AMLA. So what they are doing is they're gathering the data to see, maybe to assess. Probably, I am assuming they would choose an institution which is a large institution, and which probably, from an AMLA's perspective, is seen to of a more heightened risk, maybe. I am not sure, because again, the criteria for selection, I do not believe that anyone in Malta actually fulfilled that criteria. So they would probably be choosing in a different manner via the data gathering exercise that they did.
Yes, it's of course relevant that you say that this data gathering exercise is a common one, and you have a subsidiary in Ireland, I think also in Austria. But so your Irish subsidiary or partner, not partner, subsidiary, had the same thing, because you wouldn't want different countries to be chosen in different ways. You also talked about large institutions with perhaps a higher risk, and of course large institutions have a higher risk because they have many more customers, many more transactions, and many more services, possibly the case. Without mentioning any names, of course, there are some very, very large global financial institutions who regularly have their name in the media for having been fined very large sums, and it must be quite challenging being in the compliance function, because the directors will say, we need to engage in profitable business, we need to keep our name out of the press, at least for the wrong reasons. Okay, well, we may hear more of that over time, but I think it said that it wouldn't be fully implemented, the intensive scrutiny, until, well, originally the idea was 2028, so we've got a couple of years there yet. Let's see. We've touched upon everything I've got on my slide. Before we talk about your experience, Alexandra, as a student on our programs, is there anything else you want to share with us that you think we haven't touched upon for the challenges? We've established the benefits, because it keeps you off the grey list of complying with regulations. Anything that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to share with us?
Well, just to close off, what I can say is sometimes, you know, when things happen, like something like the grey list, or it's sort of a wake-up call.
Yes.
A wake-up call in the sense, although you know it would be there, it actually does some good, really, because then actually people realize, isn't it, like when you get fined. If you don't get fined, you're like, okay, I'm okay. Then in Malta, for example, there was this round where every institution got a fine nearly. Um, and it's actually a wake-up call. I'm not saying it's good, but in reality, it is a wake-up call. It makes you realize, okay, this can happen. Not thinking, could it happen? This can happen. It has happened. Okay, I know what I have to do for it not to happen again. So it sort of keeps everyone on their toes. Us in the compliance field, I'm always on my toes. Maybe other people don't understand what compliance is all about. What I think you have to be a certain typology to be a compliance person. So sometimes things happen for a reason. That's what I believe, at least, and it's not all bad at the end of the day. If you handle it right, if you take it with say, okay, we got this, let's get out of it, it should be fine. But at least like that, yes, we were grey listed, we got out in a year, like another EU member state. It was unfortunate, really, but it wasn't something that we weren't. We knew it was coming. So.
Yeah, and as I think, although you said it put Malta on the map, possibly for the wrong reasons, also
Yes.
the fact that you were able to get off it so quickly, and since then have had very supportive comments from the IMF that I used when I introduced it, and the growth rate of the economy as a whole is testimony to that. So we get into the section about Alexandra's own learning experience. But before we do that, any listeners, it seems to me that to survive in compliance, you have to have something of a thick skin. You mustn't take it personally. You must be prepared that, yeah, you may get not caught out isn't the right word. There may need to be an improvement in some of your systems, but I think the example we've heard about today has been one of very close cooperation and awareness that perhaps things weren't completely correct, and not a surprise, as Alexandra said when she started her response to these questions, and a learning opportunity. Now, learning opportunities lead quite nicely into the next slide, please, Sinead, which should be, when all the pieces come in, your own experience, Alexandra, of learning, studying with Bangor University. And you graduated last December. That was the picture of you earlier on. What would you share with people who may be listening and thinking, well, I don't know, I'm very busy and in work, and I've my family obligations and things. I just don't know. It's a long time since I studied. Have you got anything to share with the process of studying, how you found that?
It was, well, I wanted, it was a dream of mine to continue my studies, and quite specifically. And so that's why I chose Bangor University, first of all, for this specific program that you have in financial crime compliance. I did my research, and it always, whenever I looked at something, it always led back to Bangor University. I thought, okay, juggling a full-time job, I don't work 40 hours a week, because slightly more than that. So I was like, how am I going to do this? In reality, by distance learning, although distance learning does have its pros and cons, for me it was a good method to study, because I could keep up with the lectures that were done. So there were lectures in the evenings. So they were 7 p.m. UK time, which is 8 o'clock Maltese time. So that gave me time to come back from work, to settle down, and to log in. So I attended all live sessions. There are sessions that are recorded, so you have to be a bit disciplined with yourself. And obviously what I did is I sacrificed my weekends, but not all weekends. So I like swimming, I like cycling, and I like running. So I would still go out for my bike ride on a Sunday morning. I would still go out for my run or swim on a Saturday. It actually would help me focus more, because that's why I do sports, actually, because it helps me focus. And I would then sit at my desk in the afternoon doing research, reading, and catching up over the weekend. During the week, I would attend lectures, but then I would do most of my studying and assignments over the weekend. It is a bit of a sacrifice, but if I can do it, I think everyone can do it. I do have a family, so I work full time. I have family commitments. I have a dog as well, so that is also another commitment. I did manage, and I think anyone can manage. I mean, it's about being a bit more organized, and rather than spending a Sunday afternoon watching a film, which I used to like doing, but I would stay in my study, and believe it or not, after the 2 years and after I actually graduated, because then it sunk in, I miss it. I do miss the studying element, the research. I hadn't studied for so long. I found it quite difficult, like online libraries, because I'm very used to old school. I print things, I highlight, I read. So for me, that's the most difficult that I found, but I got used to it. So after maybe a year, I really got into it. I got used to things, and then a year, and the second year actually flew by. So if I can do it, anyone can. It's about maybe finding the right time, your right time, because everyone has different ways of doing things. But my right time was the weekend, not the whole day of the weekend. I would still do my things that I enjoy doing. Obviously, if I had deadlines, I would probably not go out for that run, but I still managed. So it is doable.
Well, everyone listening, and let me say, now is the time for you to start typing your questions into either the Q&A or the chat area, so I can ask them to Alexandra. So do start putting your questions in. That ringing endorsement, of course, comes after she's graduated, so there's no benefit to her. But one question will be, and what will you do with all that spare time that you now have? Well, you don't have to divulge that to us. The process of studying, of course, we call it return to learning, and return to learning, depending on how long ago since you engaged in intensive study with assessment, can be a challenge. But as Alexandra said, she did it. Anybody could do it. Well, she sounds to have been very dedicated in doing so, and it's about cutting out time. It's no point me saying no pain, no gain, but the gain at the end is recognizable. What about the relevance of the things you were learning during your studies, and then afterwards, the relevance of what you studied since you've completed it, which is some 6 months or more?
So during my studies, actually, it was the module I had with you, Stephen, where we were talking about oh my goodness, I've blanked out now. But it was about the wildlife trade, for example. I had an assignment that was something that I'd never dealt with, so to speak. So that was quite interesting. But when I was actually also working on the assignment, listening to the lectures and everything, things from my work experience were coming into play. So certain things were like I could relate to during my studies. So there were other modules where I could actually apply what I did at my workplace. Obviously, everything sanitized, but for me, the studying part, I learned a lot. So I did gain a lot of information, I learned a lot, but there were other elements where I could apply what I already did. But I did learn a lot, and throughout my studies, it helped me even look at things differently, even at my work, and even, for example, certain elements of management, because we had some management modules. It helped me as well because we had some an HR module as well, which was really interesting. So the relevance since the completion of my studies helped me even the way. So I was doing research for my studies, which now I'm doing the sort of same research. I use the same sort of methods that I was doing with my study for my work. Whereas before I started my studies, I was doing research in a different manner. So it helped me, the research, and even something that I also applied when I was doing my studying. So I like to very much, if I'm drafting a policy, if I'm drafting procedures, I like to draft them in a way, okay, a policy would be a short document, but if it's a procedure that someone else has to follow, I like to use like matrices, like boxes, and putting things into boxes and columns and rows so people can follow. I applied the same approach when I was doing my assignments as well. And I got some good marks and some good comments from my lecturers on that. So I think that you have to, the relevance of how you apply your studies and afterwards, the takeaway is just do things how you think would be clear, because if you are studying, you have to be clear with the lecturer who's going to correct your work, who's going to see you're presenting your work. Whereas if you are at work and you are preparing procedures, policies, other people are going to work with, they need to understand. It's sort of the same thing, but for different sort of audiences. But for me, although I did get a master's from Bangor, once the relevance of it for me is getting a master's, obviously, but also specifically in financial crime compliance, which is my area, and not a lot of people have that specific qualification.
Indeed. And the other thing to say, so please do start putting your things in the chat area. You can, as I've mentioned, unmute in a moment, but preferably put it in the chat area. The other thing to say that makes you even more unique is that, as with our other programs, the MBA from Bangor, a research-based university with a long history, also comes with a parallel professional qualification. So the professional qualification recognized globally is financial intelligence specialist, which comes from our partner Manchester CF in Canada. So if you want to be globally unique, come to Bangor and study. And as Alexandra said, the kind of things that you are exposed to are intended to stretch your mind. So I've never thought about that. I've never really done anything about wildlife trafficking, I think was the example that Alexandra said. So sometimes we encourage you to apply things to your existing activities within the bounds of confidentiality of your organization's activities. But other times we say, try and choose a different geography, try and choose a different kind of situation and approach it from first principles, because sometimes we get overly confident. Oh, I know how to do this. I've been doing this for years. Well, perhaps you've been doing it wrongly for years. Okay, so thanks a lot for all of that, Alexandra. Stay with us for any questions. And your questions, as I say, could be about what Alexandra said about compliance, but could also be about her experience in being a student. Would it work for me? So let's have a look here. Where's that gone? Okay. Oops. I saw a question earlier. Serkan says, well, are you expecting another difficulty for Malta in the next money val evaluation? Says Serkan.
Okay, I hope not, Serkan. I hope we don't get another difficulty for Malta in the next money val evaluation. I think Malta's trying very, very hard in order not to get another difficulty. I mean, me being in the sector itself, I don't have the full spectrum of things. So I don't think that Malta may have another grey listing. I hope not, because we've tried hard and we've worked hard towards keeping our name off the grey list.
Yes, and I think another example in parallel that we talk about in the module, I didn't ask Alexandra to talk about my module, but one of the things we talk about in my module is a country in Southeast Asia, will remain nameless, who was is very keen to establish itself as a financial services centre globally on that never-ending 24-hour cycle of financial services, monitors extensively, has a culture which is in its everyday life fairly compliant with what government's seeking to do. And they were surprised by a multi-billion-dollar scandal, for want of a better phrase, in money laundering only a couple of summers ago. And they were very concerned that it would damage the perception globally of this particular country. They moved very quickly, just as we saw with Malta moving very quickly to address the challenges and overcome them, and hopefully in the country in Southeast Asia to re-establish a positive perception of the location, because we talk about the perception of individual companies, the perception of brands, the perception of personalities, but there's also the perception of countries, particularly for certain industry sectors. Now, come on, I'm just having a quick look. If you are starting out today, says Jackie, let me just try and have a look at this. If you're starting out today, how would you recommend for someone to go to build their knowledge? Where can they start? Presumably in compliance, this is about Jackie. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So when I started out, in banking quite a few years ago. It wasn't actually in compliance. At the time, you would handle basically everything. So it was a small institution. We used to do. I used to do like regulatory reporting for the central bank. I used to handle time deposits for customers. And I was involved in quite a few things. I remember at the time I was given the opportunity to review customer files, and I sort of started even looking into transactions, and that's where I knew that I liked that area the most, the investigation sort of side of it. So for me, I grew, I enhanced my knowledge in banking. So I started from the bottom. I did not go directly into compliance. And nowadays, I think that people may underestimate a compliance function and customer due diligence, how you do it. You have people who are in, they do customer due diligence, for example, for a year or so in a financial institution, and may think that they have the right knowledge and experience to actually take a step further, to be in a management position, or even taking up the role of a money laundering reporting officer. From my experience, I don't think it works that way. I think you would need to work your way up to even become a money laundering reporting officer. To be a compliance person, it has to be part of you. It has to be part of your character, because being a compliance person is, you have to cross all the T's and dot all the I's in compliance. You cannot leave any stone unturned. So that comes from it has to be a character. It has to be part of your character, I believe. If someone was to start, I think that the best thing would be is learn, listen, take everything in. Do not think that you know things, because what you know today, you will tomorrow there's something new. So it's always about learning. So there has to be this thirst for knowledge, for being very inquisitive, asking questions, always ask for guidance, and even it's good to even challenge, not just say okay because my manager, my boss told me to do this. Challenge, but to challenge it has to be, you have to also to gain the knowledge and experience, you need to learn. So it's just not about doing things at work. So even reading articles, keeping up to date. So if I were to tell someone where to start from, I think you should actually, to really understand, you need to feel it, you need to do it, you need to touch it every day. So just if you really want to work in compliance, just start out and see what happens, because compliance is not for everyone. So I would say that it's something that sort of you need to like, you need to want, and be patient to understand and to learn. If that answers all the questions.
Well, I think it probably does. And just like it's got to be in your DNA, for want of a better phrase, in your bones, just like I think there's a phrase, something like once a criminal, always a criminal. It's in their DNA as well.
Exactly.
But you can't suddenly leap into compliance after very limited awareness of even one part of banking. And Sharon says, is senior management involved in the affairs of compliance? And who does compliance report to? Aha, now that's the big challenge about ownership at senior levels. What about that, Alexandra? The involvement of senior management.
Every institution has a different governance and reporting structure. So if I were to take my reporting structure, for example, as MLRO, I report directly to the regulator. So as MLRO, I have the independence, I have the authority to decide whether to escalate a report or not directly to the regulator. I do not need anyone's or my senior management or my board approval for that. On a day-to-day, I report and I liaise with our managing director. I do report directly to the board. So the board, the senior management, your board, they do get involved in the sense that you update them, you provide them with updates, you discuss things with them. But when it comes to senior management getting involved, obviously, yes, on your day-to-day operations, so you do keep them roped in and involved on what you're doing, how you are actually fulfilling obligations. So is it by carrying out customer risk assessments, customer reviews, transaction monitoring? Obviously, you need to keep senior management involved because that is, first of all, those functions are more of a first line function rather than a second line function. But when it comes to reporting lines, it depends per organization how they are structured. For example, in Malta, the FIU implementing procedures allow for various ways of reporting. It doesn't have to be directly to the board of directors, but as an MLRO, obviously, you have to be independent. So that would be directly to the regulatory authority. But on a day-to-day, if you are a head of financial crime compliance, as myself, the way we are structured, I do report directly to the board, but I also liaise with our managing director on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you for that. And it returns to something I said earlier. Clearly, the culture and willingness to cooperate together, but also to allow someone to have the direct line to the regulator is not necessarily repeated in all cultures around the world. So that is a challenge. But the willingness for independence, not only from senior management, but also from the individual. In some cultures, I do as my seniors tell me to do. I don't even question why do we do this. It's just the way things are done. I'm going to ask one last time, does anybody have anything they want to ask before we just tell you a little bit about the programs? I'm just having a quick look. You can always get in touch with us and we can forward them on to Alexandra at another time. I don't see anyone with a hand up wishing to on mic and say it. As I say, you can forward any questions on hereafter. Let's talk a little bit about the programs that we have. Just you would expect that we wouldn't miss the opportunity to say Alexandra found it useful. Next slide, please. For those of you who are wondering, in the domain of, it's a long time since I studied, will I be able to cope? Well, Alexandra answered that for you. And on the next slide, it talks about the programs that we have. Here they are. So the one we've been talking about is financial crime and compliance. That's the one that Alexandra has been awarded the MBA with the Financial Intelligence Specialist Parallel Award. There's also the illicit finance one, which has many of the common aspects of financial crime, but particularly with regard to national security, defence, military, etc. But of course, they're looking to understand how criminals use the ecosystem of finance to subvert national security. again, carries the financial intelligence specialist. Our Chartered Banker MBA has a module on financial crime, but doesn't specialize in it. It carries the Chartered Banker designation from the Chartered Banker Institute of Edinburgh. You'll notice at the bottom that we talk about single module study. If you only have an interest in one particular aspect, or you aren't sure if you could cope with the workload and the assessment, why not come in and try a single module? And if you complete the assessment, then that can count. You can carry that forward as credits to your study. If you decide, yeah, it's for me, and I can pick up and I want to complete a full MBA, or there's a postgraduate diploma, postgraduate certificate, we're very flexible. If you wanted further information, then this is where to find it. Okay, we do believe that we are innovative. We're globally unique. There are no other MBAs in the world in these subject specialisms that carry a professional designation recognized worldwide. Flexible, online, as Alexandra said, sometimes walk the dog, sometimes swim, run, or whatever it is. And sometimes you can't do that if you've got a deadline looming. But if you do have serious issues, you can defer some part of studies. We genuinely believe it's designed to make life easier for busy professionals. The CBMBA has been going for some 14 more years, and we've got way over 1,000 graduates. The method of study, the method of teaching, the method of assessment, the method of learning is well proven, and our dual award qualifications are globally unique. Thanks again, Alexandra, for everything, and thanks everyone for joining in. As I said, if you have any questions further that you want to post to us, then we'll forward them on to Alexandra. Great. Thanks again, Alexandra.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye.
No, thank you indeed for your great insight. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Same to you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.